Good morning and welcome back to the reading of God's Word. We've just cut through the last video. We were in the book of Ezra. And Ezra was recording then those events that were taking place, post-exilic events. In other words, the coming back of Zerubbabel to fulfill the prophecy of God that Cyrus was going to send them back, and so that has happened. So we won't go back into Ezra. We come to the point of Ezra having now been there. He got there in 558. Remember that Zerubbabel came in 538. Zerubbabel in 538, Ezra in 458. So that was about 80 years. It looks like 80 years later that after Zerubbabel, after the building of the temple, the building of the altar, before Ezra came back, and then he began to work on the people. So now here it is in 444, so some 13 years or so later, and here comes Nehemiah then with the third group. Now, Nehemiah learns right away that the condition in Jerusalem is still not well at all. This is a mess, and he is moved to go back to help the restoration of Israel and the people there. So he gets moved. Remember, he's the cupbearer for the king, and the king recognizes that he is upset about something, and he begins to question him about it. So Nehemiah then prays, and the king authorizes him to go back to Jerusalem. So he is moved then to go back here. That's all happening in chapter 1. In chapter 2, now in verse 8, we see that the king does grant it. He gives him permissions, and he gives letters to the governors in Judea to permit and provide the rebuilding there. There were already provisions for the temple, but here now we get the big issue here is Nehemiah gets permission from the king to do this restoration, but it still was not going to be without protest from the local people there. So that's in chapter 2. Chapter 3, we get the assignments. Now in chapter 2, he goes out, remember, at night when he gets there. He's not there very long before he goes out and he evaluates the walls. He rides all the way around it, looking at all of the damage that was done and all of the gaps in the walls. And he sees a tremendous problem there with the security of Jerusalem itself, and it's just totally destroyed. So he sets his mind then to begin to assign, really, in chapters 4 through 6, he assigns the work to many groups. When you read through this, it's this group, and then next to that group, this group, next to that group, this group, next to that group, this group, over and over, and they began to working on the wall. So that goes all the way from chapters 4 through chapter 6. Now we see that introduce here Sanballat and Tobiah. And these two characters are ringleaders now in trying to stop they're actually the governor and whatever in high standing places here in the Judah area. So in Jerusalem, so they're trying to stop this because they believe that if the Israelites are successful into rebuilding the wall and having the temple and having their own homes inside of Jerusalem, they begin to secede really from the kingdom. And if that was their argument, no, these people are trying to rebuild and they don't want to be a part of the king of over in Susa at that point, the Persian king. So we read now, there's a lot here in chapter 4 and 5 is a lot of effort by these people. The whole reading here is the effort of Sanballat trying to stop, up to the point of trying to kill them before they could get it finished. So we read in chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, they were mocking them, and in verses 7 through 23, there was conspiracy against them. And all of chapter 5 was about extortion. And then in chapter 6, we get verses 1 through 9, they were trying to compromise with them. And then chapter 6, verses 10 through 14 was by treachery. Again, they were going to kill them all. And the whole time, Nehemiah wound up having them all working to the point where he had half of them working and the other half on guard. And even those working had their sword on their side. They were really afraid of these people, but they were determined that they were going to get this wall finished. And finally, in chapter 6, verse 15, the work is completed. It took them 52 days to complete that work. And then we also see that the enemies lost their confidence. In other words, they finally, after the completion of the wall, then Sanballat and Tobiah and the rest of those guys, they just sort of went their own way. Because God was completing what he had said he was going to do at that point. So then we come into chapter 7, verses 1 through 3, and we see then that the doors and the bolts are now set. And Nehemiah and Ezra, remember Ezra, he's still there, and they turn their attention then to registering the people yet again. Now, this is right in line with 1 Chronicles chapters 1 through 9 and the genealogies that are in Ezra. Here we see this again. It's going to be there yet again. So in verses 4 through 73, it is virtually the same registry as in Ezra chapter 2. Now we get into chapter 8 here, Nehemiah chapter 8, and Ezra turns his attention to get the priests and the Levites, as well as all of the population, oriented back to the laws of Moses. This was in his heart to begin with. So Ezra still now is working on this to include all of the sacrificial laws as well as the moral laws. So Ezra he's a priest. He is well versed in the Mosaic laws, and he intends to teach it just as much as he can to get these people turned back around. Now in verses 4 through 8, we're in chapter 8 here, verses 4 through 8, that must have been an amazing worship service. This is one of those times that when you read it, you can almost visualize it. Ezra stood up with the book. This was the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. And when he opened the book to read it, all the people stood up, and Ezra read the entire Pentateuch. This is reading from Genesis to Deuteronomy. That you remember back when you were reading it, how long that took. And he read that in probably about 6 hours or maybe 7 hours or something of the day. And all of the people were standing at that time. And it was a time of reflection, a time of repentance. It stirred the people when he did this. So he read the entire Pentateuch, and that was a major event in all of this as they were dedicating both the temple and the wall and all of Jerusalem. Now, in the last video of this week, we're going to cover chapters 9 through 13 and finish up with Nehemiah, with all of the efforts to cleanse and refocus the people back to God. So we're not through with this. We've got one more video. We're going to do that. And in the next video, we're going to move into the book of Esther. So we'll get into that when we get there. So pray now that God, as we have finishing up Ezra and Nehemiah, the post-exilic books, so pray that God gives you a good understanding and the insight to be able to determine what God is doing at this time to bring his people back, because this is not just his coming back. They're coming back really in the temporary time right here, but this is a picture of them coming back into Israel after another exile, after 70 AD when the temple was burned again. And we see now the movement coming back to Israel, setting up for the millennial reign of Christ. So all of this is interconnected here, and we'll take one more look at that as we get into the next video. So with that, may God bless the reading of his word.